What's a dead, dying video game that you wish would make a comeback? 1 vs 100. Great party game. Even people who aren't gamers had a blast. Coolest part was its sup time was actually scheduled, basically like event television, usually on 5 nights a week at varying times, certain themed nights, but usually general topics. Host voiceover was done live. They had something huge going with that game, just couldn't find it enough. Jade Cocoon, another monster-catching game, but being able to fuse them together led to thousands of combinations. Plus the more you use them the bigger they'd grow in size. It was a fun surprise taking my starter moon back to the first area and realizing it was 3 times bigger. Didn't search or comment before I mentioned the same game. The first one was absolutely amazing, still is. Such a shame the second one got rid of the merging with changed to appearance aspect. Seriously, would love to see a game like the first again, it was just so great. I know it's not dead, but I miss playing with a bunch of my real-life friends on old-school RuneScape. It was magical. Now I play and it's alright, but it's just too lonely and it's basically all grinding. I feel you. OSRS is not what RuneScape in 2007 is, and can never be. The player base is just too different, and the community, which controls updates via polls, is interested in vastly different things from the community back in 2007. What was once a magical game full of adventure, mystery, fantasy, and magic is now full of spreadsheets, efficiency guides, and market investments, monitoring. Black and white. I still miss the complexity of the first one, and hated the second. Legacy of Kain. The whole series is a masterpiece, except Blood Omen 2. I would love a remake, and a new one game following Defiance. Also honorable mentions, because everyone knows about them: Silent Hill, Flikonami, Mega Man series After X. We need to close the story. Bloody Roar, a unique fighting game series that died a pathetic death with a terrible final entry. Now collecting dust and possession by Konami. I'd fucking buy the rights from them if they'd let me. It can't be worth that much to them. Prince of Persia. Loved the games. Each a little different, but the core mechanics and puzzles really got me good. Yet to see Parker, combat and puzzles used so well again. Thought you meant the original at first, but I guess you mean those Sands of Time etc. where you could rewind time if you fucked up. Running on walls and shit. Those games were fun as hell. Not a lot of people play them. Breath of Fire. Breath of Fire 3 was my first JRPG and I loved the post-apocalyptic fantasy setting that 3 and 4 seemed to have. And of course turning into dragons is always awesome. Sadly, I didn't hear good things about the 5th game, and 6 was a mobile game never released outside of Japan, but I doubt it was of the quality I hoped for. Killzone. I loved Killzone 2 and 3, but Shadowfall pretty much blew the franchise's brains all over the wall. I know it was basically just a COD clone, but I still love the game design and story it had, up until the last game, that is. Mario Kart Wii. Homebrewing away isn't hard. Follow Michael MJD's video on YouTube. You just then need to download the Homebrew browser, post Homebrew, then download WiiMFi from Mr. Bean 3500 VR from the Homebrew browser, and boom, you can play Mario Kart Wii online again. The Legend of Dragoon, a hidden gem of a game that got overshadowed by a Final Fantasy game upon its release. There was supposed to be a sequel, but it got cancelled, and now the company behind the game is gone. I have little hope that it will ever see the light of day outside of PS1 ports or emulators. Some games from the Flash gaming era deserve a sequel. Every once in a while someone would create a game that's just too good for a Flash game but too underdeveloped to be a legendary classic because of many limitations. I could list examples, but everyone who grew up playing these probably has their own examples, and there could be an endless discussion. Plenty of people that made the more successful ones went on to create proper sequels or now work in the industry. That's just the luckier ones though. Blood Omen series. I want the dark vampire overlord fantasy world with modern-day graphics, gothic architecture, blood-filled sewers, and gore, a mix of magic and horror, where man either serves a master who can protect him, or hides covering in fear of those who have conquered the night. Friday the 13th. The game, it had so much potential and was so much fun, but a combination of a lawsuit between the series creators and the developers not really supporting it anymore essentially just killed it. Spy vs. Spy on the Commodore 64. I would love to see a modern version of two spies planting traps and using gadgets against each other while trying to get the secret nuclear launch codes first and blast off in a rocket to escape the exploding tropical island base. Evolve. God, what happened to that game was a friggin' tragedy. It was my group's dedicated game night game for the 2 months before it lost its support. And then Overwatch came out and took over. You can still play peer-to-peer, but I really wish it had been a bigger success. Sure, the business model was scummy, but nothing nowadays plays the same as Evolve Stage 2 did. Interstate 76 is literally unplayable on a modern PC, the way the game was made. Some physics stuff was tied to the CPU speed, so if you try to run the game now, you'll end up with cars bouncing all over the place, and that's if you can even get the game running at even a basic level to start with. It's too bad because as far as car combat goes, this was a shit. You had a story, you had loadouts, you had scenarios. Sure, by modern standards, it's very rough, and fights can essentially devolve into cars doing 360s around one another, but imagine if it got remade now, it'd be amazing. Final Fantasy XI was a heck of a game, really challenging, but because of that it had a really strong community. I meet some great people there and had an amazing time playing the game with them. I recently tried it again, but the game can be pretty much played solo, which takes all the fun out of it. I'd like to return to its heyday once more. Neo Tokyo, really good FPS multiplayer map of Half-Life with the strong cyberpunk theme and a killer soundtrack. The community's been declining for years, and the source engine is really showing its age. The game could be revitalized with a newer engine, added mechanics, and a bigger community. Blinks, the Time Sweeper, Smile. Shoutout to Jex and Raymond 2, Crash Bandicoot, Spyro the Dragon, Ty the Tasmanian Tiger and Cal the Kangaroo made a comeback. Here's hoping we see another Blinks game someday despite Microsoft dropping the trademark. Marvel Heroes, fantastic Diablo-esque game from the creator of that franchise where you played as Marvel heroes and villains. So much to do and fantastic attention to detail was one of the things that got me into reading comics again. Was so much fun and was so cool blowing stuff up as Punisher America or seeing how many squirrels you could summon as Squirrel Girl before your PC started chugging. Then Gazillion suddenly shit the bed and the entire thing just disappeared from Steam and consoles. I'm still bitter about the purchases I made in it and the unused currency that ended up just being a waste of money. Imagine how popular it would be now with the MCU being so successful these days. The Save the World mode from Fortnite sadly got abandoned by the devs because of the success of the Battle Royale mode. It's basically Minecraft with guns. The story ends with a cliffhanger in which a main character sacrifices herself and we're left to guess if she's dead or not. Lineage 2, they kept saying Lineage 3 or Lineage Eternal would eventually come. Instead all we got is a perversion of the original game and then a cash cow app. Lineage 2 at its prime was an awesome PvP MMO, more grindy than a sheet of coarse sandpaper though admittedly. Jade Cocoon, the first one with the millions of combinations for your creatures, not the second one that was basically hunter-gatherer Pokemon. Seriously, it was an awesome PS1 game with an endless mode at the end of the story to keep you playing. Jak and Daxter, with Ratchet and Clank graphics. Don't do a reboot or a creative remake, no. Just grab the original game and make it look up to par with modern games. We need more cartoonish games, especially amazing games like the Jak and Daxter series. Team Fortress 2. It's a great game, but now it's filled with bots and hackers. You have to vote at least 5-10 bots per game, which is very annoying. Plus running out and getting headshot by one the second you do makes the game unbearable. The community is dying due to lack of updates to the game. EverQuest. In the early days of the game, it was the most frustrating, irritating and wonderful game I ever played. Playing at the end game took a lot of dedication, and guilds literally had applications for people to join because the content was so difficult and required so many people you had to literally build a small community to tackle it. The game had its share of shitheads, but I still have friends to this day from that game. I personally love the elitism that came from being part of only a small handful of people that got to experience the hardest parts of the game. It was genuinely crazy how different my experience of that game was versus the casual person. Other games have obviously come into this space like WoW or Guild Wars, but none ever were able to give me the reward aspect like Ek did. Ek was hard, but victory just tasted better. Their smile. Clive Barker's Undying. It was a great game that never really got its due, and could have been expanded upon. For those not familiar, it's a FPS, survival horror with a weapons power system similar to BioShock's, though a few years older, that involves a 1920s Irish adventurer fighting ancient curses and Lovecraftian monstrosities. It also had some cool other worlds you could visit, and the only relation Clive Barker's Jericho has to Undying is that it also involved Clive Barker. So I don't consider that any kind of comeback, and I've mostly heard bad things about Jericho. Cane and Lunch 2. Dog Days. The multiplayer was so unique for a shooter game. There was a game mode that was basically the aftermath of a huge robbery job. Just 8 of you spawn and you collect all the cash you can. You can betray your teammates and take their cash before you get to the getaway vehicle. But if you do, they come back as the SWAT team trying to stop you. It made for hours of fun, and every time you played it turned out a little different because of the betrayal ability. Plants vs. Zombies, Heroes. An amazing PvZ card game with a lot of charm as well, although due to poor marketing it didn't do very well. Last update was a balance update that happened early 2019. Unless if you count the major bug fix update that happened I think late 2020, but other than that radio silence. Currently, the game is in a TF2 state where it has zero support from devs but a thriving community. This game just needs a comeback. It's dying for one. I'm not aware of any genre that has really gone away to the point of needing a comeback. The closest I would say that a genre has come to fully disappearing was the point-and-click style adventure series, but the indie market has removed them from the endangered species list quite handily. I suppose if I had to give an answer to what I would like to see take a bigger share of the titles being released in the modern era would be couch co-op games. As another person answered, I don't tend to like to play online games because of the toxic nature they tend to nurture. The only game that I really enjoyed online multiplayer with is the Monster Hunter series, but that's because it is purely with little opportunity to grief people. There are just so few games coming out now that allow you to sit next to your mates, or your significant other and make a night of it. Panya, or as some people might remember it, Albatross 18. It was an MMO based on golf, among other things, and I kinda wish I played more of it since it was actually quite relaxing for me. An official server still exists in Thailand, but pretty much every English server, including private ones, seem to be dead now. Absolver, an open-world 3D fighting game with RPG elements and gear, where you learn new styles and moves by actually using them in combat and having them used on you. I love the aesthetic of the broken environments and the eerie feeling of being watched and attacked by totally silent enemies. That, combined with an equally silent player base due to a lack of voice chat, forced you to interact with people based on intent and emotes, rather than just communicating normally. In my experience, all PvP duelists had a sense of honor, and if you bowed, 99% of the time, your opponent would bow back. Something about all of it was just magical, and I wish it hadn't struggled like it did. Team Fortress 2 was absolutely incredible in its heyday. Now there's maybe 20 decent community servers when there used to be hundreds. It's also a lot harder trying to get back into the competitive scene as an adult. Most people just don't have the time to commit to scrims and matches due to adult obligations. It's crazy to think about how anyone became successful at career video gaming when it's so reliant on support from others to really get going. Resident Evil Resistance, it's still alive, but abandoned by published unreleased and by developers soon after, without even basic multiplayer functionality. Still, it's amazing experience that gave me too much fun, and there is no games like it to replace it. Used to play Call of Duty United Offensive online a lot. I've never played another COD online that felt the same. I was part of a few different servers and met some great people, had a lot of fun. Honestly, some of my favorite online moments happened playing that game. It's so old now though. It was dying when COD 4 Modern Warfare first came out. It's probably long dead by now. Sunset Overdrive. Sure, the story is a bit odd and the mission design is quite repetitive, however the traversal system really is quite captivating and the humor, aesthetic and the soundtrack makes up for it as it is very bright and out there, something that I've never seen in any other games, hence why it's unique, so I heavily recommend anyone to try it. It's a shame that it's only available on Xbox and PC, but Sony owns Insomniac Games now and the future of a sequel for the game is questionable. Invisible, Incorporated, it's a complete game ... but there's so much room for options and expansions. I know there's mods and the risk of oversaturating the items, but I'd rather have, like, 12 more agents and a handful of gadgets. Battlefield Heroes, man, I love that game. I know there's a project out there that revives it, or even multiple projects, but it's not the same IMO. There's like 20 people online and they are usually the sweatiest people you can imagine. I wish the game would just be here with its original player base, that would be truly awesome. Loadout was a really cool unique action shooter that was easy to pick up but hard to master. Even the grinding wasn't that bad compared to stuff like Apex Legends or League. They got FK'd by lawsuits and bullshit even though they had an active and passionate player base. Fixed camera angle Resident Evil. I love the world and games but can't even watch a playthrough of the newer ones without getting horrible motion sickness. The first-person view and/or constantly shifting camera angles get me. Even the RE2 and Nemesis remakes are unplayable for me and I've given up on even watching Village straight through. I have to put them in an index card-sized window on my iPad and set it on the coffee table 5 feet away if I want to watch a playthrough or speedrun. Gonna sound odd, but Halo in Australia. I tried a while back to get into MP games, but found myself only getting in servers in America or Asia. I used to enjoy playing Halo Custom Edition in 2012-13 and was so hyped hearing Halo MCC coming to PC, only to find out I basically can't play it because of where I live. Star Wars Battlefront 2. EA rushed the release of the game so it was lacking and basically pay to win. It took them ages to actually recover and make the game better, and during March 2020 it was getting really good. Then EA said they were cutting support. DICE, the devs, really wanted to continue but EA wouldn't let them, and it just hasn't been as good since support was cut. Arcanum, of Steamworks and Magic Obscura, an obsoletely phenomenal CRPG made by Tim Kaine and Leonard Boyarsky, the same guys who created the original Fallout game. It is set in a traditional fantasy setting, but a world which is starting to go through an industrial revolution. Truly marvelous. Seriously, if you haven't played it, do it.